Did you know that animals can change an ecosystem? Whether it's a predator and prey species relationship, or prairie dogs digging burrows and creating habitat for other animals. Hi, and thanks for joining the lesson today. Today's lesson is on biotic factors. So, biotic factors are living organisms that affect the growth or survival or reproduction of another organism. So, how trees can affect the growth and reproduction of herbivores that could eat them or live in them. And ecology is the study of the interaction of living organisms with each other and with the physical environment. So, ecology is going to be the study of biotic and abiotic factors in a system. When we look at populations, this is all of the individuals of the same species in the same place at the same time. So, we can look at all of the antelope in special areas in Alberta in 2020. Or we could look at all the bison in Elk Island National Park. Those would be populations. They're going to be separate from populations like the antelope, pronghorn antelope that might live in Montana, or bison that live in Wood Buffalo National Park. Those would be different populations. Now, some information about a population can be obtained from studying the individual's lifespan, food preferences, and reproductive cycle. But other information can only be available if we study the population as a whole. So that would be competition among members for the same resources like food, territory, or mating partners, and relationships between that species and other species. So predator prey, so bison and wolves, or antelope and coyotes, or moose and parasites. We can also look at symbiotic relationship that are partnerships between two species. And these could be beneficial, neutral, or harmful. Communities are all the species that occupy a given area at the same time. So, a community is all the different biotic factors that are in the special areas or in Elk Island National Park or Wood Buffalo Park. And this would be the study of a community, so only the living organisms. So, we have an individual, which is one individual organism, a population, which is going to be a group of members of the same species in the same area, a community, which is a group of different species, but all biotic factors living in the same area in the same time. And then we have an ecosystem, which is the community plus all the non living physical environmental components. So, there again, population, one member of a particular species, only looks at members of one species. Um, and ecosystem, all the species, and all the abiotic factors. So, biomass is the mass of all the living organisms occupying a habitat, which includes all the plants and animals living above ground, the root systems of plants, bacteria in the air and the soil, and any animals or plants living underground or underwater. When we compare biomass values of two different ecosystems, we're able to compare them in their productivity. It also allows ecologists to track habitat changes over time if all of a sudden the biomass of a certain ecosystem has dropped. When we look at interactions between different biological communities, there's two main interactions. One is interspecific interactions, which is between members of two different species. So predator-prey relationships, for example. Intraspecific interactions are interactions within members of the same species. So competition for mating partners in deer or moose. And then when we look at interspecific interactions, we can classify them according to the benefits of each species. We can say they're predator-prey relationships where one is benefited and one is harmed, interspecific competition where both are harmed, or symbiotic relationships where one benefits and the effect on the other varies. So in predator-prey relationships, this can also be known as predation, one organism kills and feeds on another. So mountain lions might kill elk. The organism doing the killing is the predator, and the organism being killed is the prey. Predator and prey populations typically will go in cycles. The prey population will increase, which will allow the predators to have raised their young more successfully. So then shortly thereafter, the amount of the population of the prey will increase. Then, as the prey population increases, it will drive down, as the predator population increases, it will drive down the prey population, which then the predator population will follow. And so this goes on in cycles in perpetuity, as long as nothing interferes with it. So competition can be between members of different species, so like white-tailed deer or mule deer, when both species rely on the same food, land, and shelter. And due to the fact that there's limited access to resources, these two organisms could be in competition. So if two plants are growing and neither shades one another, they're not in competition. But if two plants are close to one another enough that they're competing for water and pollinators, now they're in competition. So two organisms can be in competition sometimes, but not in competition at other times. So another example of competition is where two or more organisms compete for the same limited resource. So great horned owls and lynx are both predators of the snowshoe hare. So they're in competition for food resources. We have predator-prey relationships, relationships, and now we have symbiosis. So symbiotic relationships are close relationships between two different species that typically live and interact together. And they're classified according to their effect on the other species. So is this relationship helpful? Then it's known as mutualism, where they'll both benefit. Is it harmful to one? Then it's parasitism, where one benefits and the other is harmed. And if it's beneficial to one, but the other one is not really affected, it's known as commensalism. So an example of mutualism is where both partners benefit from the relationship, like in the relationship between flowering plants and their pollinators, like bees, butterflies, or birds. So when pollination is carried out by the bees benefit by getting nectar, but the plant benefits by getting its pollen dispersed to other plants, so it's fertilized. In the Nile crocodile and the Egyptian plover, the crocodile benefits because food is cleaned out of its teeth, but the plover benefits because it gets food to eat. In symbiosis, one partner benefits and the other is unaffected. So the clownfish lives in a type of coral called an anemone. Now, the anemone typically will sting predators and then digest it with their enzymes that it secretes from its tentacles. But the clownfish happens to be immune to the anemone's sting because of a special mucus secreted by its skin. So the clownfish is able to benefit from having the protection of the anemone, but the anemone is largely unaffected by the clownfish. Another example is the Remora shark, and they have an adhesive disc on their dorsal surface of their head, and they use this to hitch a ride on larger animals, typically whales or larger sharks. Then food will fall from the whale's mouth, and the remora can unhitch itself and collect the scraps of food floating by. So the remora shark benefits, and the larger shark or whale is largely unaffected. And lastly, in symbiosis, we also have parasitism. This is when one partner benefits at the expense of the other. The beneficial partner is called the parasite, while the victim is referred to as the host. Now, parasites are an important factor in limiting the growth of host populations. So if there's too many hosts, parasites spread more easily, and then the population of the host will typically go down. They never try to completely wipe out a population because that would also be detrimental to the parasite. So parasites include all viruses, some worms, bacteria, and insects like mosquitoes. Parasites affect almost all species, both wild and domesticated plants and animals. And the World Health Organization estimates that 1.4 billion people worldwide are infected with parasites, which is the equivalent of about 1 in 5. Now, people in less developed areas are more susceptible due to contaminated drinking water, lower standards of living, and poor nutrition. So you can get affected by parasites in Alberta, though. If you drink untreated surface water, you might get things like giardia. Or you can get even worms from your domestic animals or livestock. And this would then, you need to be treated with a antiparasitic from your healthcare provider. So another example of parasitism is a cowbird and a warbler. So the cowbird, for a reproductive strategy, will lay its eggs in other birds' nests. So it doesn't have to spend time rearing its young. And because the cowbird chicks are often larger than the nests of songbirds where it lays its eggs, the cowbird chicks will eventually kick the warbler chicks out of the nest, leaving these warbler parents to raise a cowbird young at the expense of their own offspring. So this is a very successful reproductive strategy for the cowbird. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. See you next time.